Welcome to Evolve to Succeed, the podcast that brings together entrepreneurs, founders, business leaders and experts to talk about their journeys and explore the link between personal and business success. I'm your host, Warren Munson, founder of Evolve, a coaching, training and development company focused on enabling business and personal success and creating a community of like-minded individuals. Whether that be through our peer groups, one-to-one coaching, our training and development programs for you and your teams, or through our content and events, our mission is to get the best out of each individual and inspire them to be better both in life and in business. If you want to learn more about Evolve, including our beautiful co-working space in Ashley Cross in Poole, then please go to evolvemembers.com, where you'll find great content, insights, details of all of our services, and also information on our forthcoming events. For now though, let's get on with the show. My guest this week is Trevor Merriden, founder and MD of Merriborn Media, as well as a thought leadership expert and mentor to business startups. A self-proclaimed word and numbers nerd, Trevor has also written 3 high-profile business books and in his spare time founded and presented a radio show for startups and SMEs called The Business. We've all heard the term thought leadership before, but how many of us know its origins? What is it exactly, and how can you use it effectively to drive your content marketing? As I've just said, Trevor is considered an expert on the subject, and I was thus keen to get him on the show to expand my understanding around thought leadership, as well as hear Trevor's backstory and the journey that has led him to express an unwavering commitment towards strong professional and personal values. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
It's a delight. It's a delight to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation on things like thought leadership, content, ethics in business, and all of those kind of things. But you've had a really interesting personal journey to get to the point where you have been running Merriborn Media for over 9 years now. But for our listeners, tell them a little bit of a potted history of your background, Trevor.
Well, I'll try and keep it sort of reasonably concise and clear. But I mean, to start with, I mean, when I started my career, before I was ever a kind of words nerd, which is kind of what I do now. I was a numbers nerd, and I worked as an economist at the Bank of England, and then I realised through writing for sort of publications like the Bank's Quarterly Bulletin that there weren't a lot of people around who were good at telling stories around numbers, and particularly economic numbers. So I became a economic journalist after I'd spent 4 happy years at the bank. I realized I didn't want to stay in banking, so I went and became an economic journalist. I worked at the Economist Group. And then I thought, well, actually, I'd like to go into sort of mainstream business journalism. So I had a very lucky break. I'd knocked on the door of business journalism for a while, and eventually I was somebody who opened the door was somebody who had not had the sort of conventional upbringing in journalism themselves, hadn't started off intending to be a journalist, and neither had I. He was actually a guy from sort of venture capital who'd become an editor of a magazine called Management's Day, and so he kind of took me under his wing and found me quite useful, I think, because I was the guy in a sea full of arts-based graduates who, as a sort of economics and stats graduate, I always used to run towards the numbers. You know, when surveys came into the office, I used to run towards them, and everybody else used to run away from them. So I sort of wrote them all up, and I kind of carved a niche, and I went from editing a .com title in the early 2000s. It was .com boom, and then it was .com bust. But at the end of all that, the publishing house said, well, you know, this was a market that was out of control, and we think you did quite well. We're going to put you on this nice magazine called HR magazine. So I then edited that magazine, and it was sort of nice people, you know, and they were just had some great stories to tell, and I love that, and I've loved then, and I love now, all the subjects around leadership, management, you know, and manage and development of people. And I just loved writing about that as much as I like being a journalist, if you like. So I thought that if I want to carry on doing that, I've got to stay in the subject matter. And so I did this in various ways. I went off and became a director of a PR business, which specialized in that. And we grew that business from about 1 million to 3 million. And so I was very proud of that. But at the end of the day, I wanted to run my own business. And so I kind of found this middle world between the worlds of journalism, where journalists are great at writing things, but not very good sort of consultants, if you like,
Yeah.
because they're looking for their headline and their story, and then they move on to the next thing. And the world of PR, where people are great consultants, but the PR world was changing, and they didn't have a lot to sell, the world of PR, because a lot of people were doing their own PR through social media and so
Yeah.
on. So I found this world in the middle, which is called content, which is now a much more familiar term than it was sort of 10 years ago. And it used to mean words, but
Yeah.
but now it means all sorts of things, So I found this one, and my specialism within that has been in the field of thought leadership, where I'm back in a way turned full circle, to write. You give me a piece of research and I write it up, and or I try and understand what a business's concepts are, try and relate them to their outside world, and just produce a bit of thought leadership. That's a very long answer to your
No, it's good. It's a
your very
very
open
good
question.
potted history. It's a very good
I'll
potted
finish now,
history,
don't worry.
and an interested, a words nerd and a numbers nerd. See, I'm a numbers nerd. I
Right.
can't do words, so I'm a numbers nerd. But to be both is a talented man, Trevor. So, and then it's interesting as you sort of tell that story. You come down in the end to content and to this term thought leadership, and I think we all hear that term thought leadership, and that content should be, good content does, is drive that kind of whole thought leadership piece. But for you, therefore, how would you define thought leadership, and what's its ultimate purpose in terms of content?
Well, I mean, thought leadership, if you want my kind of dictionary definition of it, if we start with that, which, so I would say that thought leadership's all about unlocking knowledge within people and within businesses and and this expertise, to be positioned as a trusted source. And the point of it is to provide a sort of a perspective that others then want to act upon, and do something about. It's a really old term. I hadn't realized this when I first started. I started working in this area, and then I thought, well, if I'm going to work in it, I need to do a bit of research in it. And I found out that thought leader was actually a term used in the 19th century in America. And it originally referred to the enlightened views of those favouring the abolition of slavery. So it goes back way into the sort of into the 19th century. Then it becomes, in a business sense, it was kind of used by a guy called Joel Kurtzman, who was the editor-in-chief of a magazine called Business and Strategy. And he sort of popularized this term. It became a bit too popular in a way, because everybody started saying, oh, I'm a thought leader. Oh, yeah, me too. I'm a thought leader. And what happened was that they became thinly disguised sales pitches without any sort of real thought in there. And so, and I think what's happened now is that we've kind of reached a kind of renaissance, certainly in terms of the interest in thought leadership, where this thing I said in the early bit about providing valuable perspective for others to act upon has come back, because we're now in a world where so much uncertainty. People aren't sure, what to do about, their workforces, about the way they're going to, organize themselves structurally as businesses and so on. There are so many uncharted territories, and you could sit there on one hand and just say, well, I don't know, I don't know what's going to happen. And the other hand, you could say, well, I think I've got an intelligent guess, an insight I can make. There is a sort of a ripe area, and also the whole models of buying and selling are changing, and so that means that in the gap there has to come something we don't meet up enough, these days, in terms of face-to-face versus virtual. And in the absence of that, you sell things to people, or you decide you want to buy things by some of the intelligence and thought that they put into what they say.
Yeah. So you're seeing a renaissance as a result of the pandemic, would you, into content?
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on. Sorry.
In terms of that whole piece around, content that is thought leadership. And when I think about content and thought leadership, I think about white papers and that kind of thing. What forms do you think, thought leadership does take in a modern world?
To be honest with you, it could take any form. I mean, you could have something that was just as, on my specialism is that, that you described is in terms of writing papers. But in writing, my own, I wrote a paper recently, a thought leadership paper on thought leadership. And in that, one of the points I was trying to make is that it's not something where someone sits around for hours on end and furrows their brow and thinks very deeply about something. Then there's a little light bulb moment, and then they write it all down, and they're hailed as a genius for their thoughts. it can be very short and to the point. It doesn't have to be written. It could be, you know, visual or audio or any other kind of the many formats that are sort of there and available. So it's not so much around the length, although, you know, when you're talking about complex issues, you probably need a bit more time to explain an argument or why you think certain ways. So it's much more about the value of the point that you're trying to put across, and placing yourself in if you're in a commercial environment, putting yourself in the shoes of your buyer, and understanding their world and the issues that they face. If you're not in a commercial world and you are genuinely saying something sort of that you feel, that's fine, but you still need to make it relatable in some way. So it's not so much about length or the form. It's much more about whether it actually resonates with the people who are receiving it.
And therefore it really does also need to have some form of prediction or opinion in it to make it and define it as a thought leadership piece and a meaningful bit of content, Trevor.
It needs it in a sense of I mean, I'd say it depends on the type of thing. Like, you know, the world's problems are complex at the moment. So that's the first thing to say. So anybody who says I have all the answers by myself, you know, I'd hesitate before you listen much further in terms of what they're saying. So predictive, yes, in the sense that I've got part of the answer to this, you know. Yes, of course, you know, that's fine, but the best thought leadership now is the thought leadership that says we're going on this journey of discovery. This is what we've found so far, and, you know, and we welcome your input, and, you know, we want you to collaborate with us in actually sort of helping go further, because you'll see in almost everything, you see in beta testing, in technological products, you see it in all sorts of ways, that the people who kind of produce something, you know, without really kind of engaging in the outside world and having a big ta-da moment, if you like, on their thought leadership, and then nobody takes the blind bit of notice, you know, that is a very sad thing to see. So, you know, it's you really need to be engaged and learning and developing yourself as you're producing the thought leadership. So when you ask me about predictive, yes, it should be predictive and can be in terms of pointing the way, but it shouldn't pretend that it's got all the answers.
Right. But yeah, it should create engagement.
Yes, I think
that's its purpose.
Yes,
really.
Yes, it adds value, you know, and perspectives for, you know, others to act on, even if that acting on is getting to the point of saying, of engaging with the person who wrote the material or did the video or whatever it happens to be.
And do you think it applies in all sectors and industries?
I think some more than others.
Okay.
You know, funnily enough, you know, some of the areas where you might think that thought leadership would be super, you know, fertile, if you like, sort of, you know, are things where a lot of people sit around a lot of the time and sort of thinking about concepts and terms and so on. And I'd actually say that's quite a crowded marketplace, and that sometimes you can just join the bandwagon and just sort of, you know, find ways of saying similar things to everyone else. I personally find the more interesting areas, some of those areas, the new technology areas, and one of the reasons that is that the more complicated the technology is, the more you have to make an effort to explain it, you know, sort of simply and directly and clearly. And so I think there's a premium on clarity. There's also a shortage of good thought leadership in that area.
Okay. And then moving on generally to think about content, one of the things that is on your website, and I really like this in terms of, you know, you called it the Merriborn formula, which is business clarity equals clever content plus engaged community. So maybe you should just talk about those two terms. For you, I suppose clever content means thought leadership pieces, does it?
Yes, it does. I mean, but it doesn't have to just mean that. It can mean sort of, you know, blogs that really hit the spot, are topical and relevant. Again, it's within the eyes of the audience. You know, it's like, you know, how is the audience receiving that? So it's clever. It's clever not in the sense that it's I've just read this and I think that person who wrote it is a clever so and so. It's actually much more about, do I find this relatable? Has this kind of struck a chord with me? Has it made me think, you know, not just that's interesting, but I've got to do something about this, and even better would be I've got to do something about this now. And the engaged communities in the equation, clarity equals, clever content plus engaged communities. You could be as clever as you like, but if your communities aren't engaged, if you're not connected in some way in terms of spreading that information, then obviously you have a very sort of poor amplification on that. And I think there's two real challenges in content. Those are that people, I think, people and businesses consistently underestimate the power of their own expertise and think that what they know and what they say is probably somehow already known, and they underestimate that other people aren't sitting around thinking about it in the way that they're thinking about it. And so one of the challenges is to get it out. So that's the content bit. So sometimes I help people get it out of themselves, and sometimes they want to do it, but I help them sort of refine what they're saying. And in the engaged communities is what do you do with that content once you've got it?
How do you use it?
How do you use it? And I think a lot of people again underestimate that if you have a piece of content or some interesting thoughts on a subject, that you can use it in lots of different ways, and there's no crime in repurposing, sort of, and repackaging a lot of that content. Consistent underestimation on both those things. Clarity on the other side of the equation is that it all begins with clarity, if you like. That if you, for all sorts of reasons, both externally in understanding your marketplace, you are researching into a particular area. Internally, if you've ever worked in a sort of larger than sort of family-sized organization, you will not be surprised at the scope for misunderstanding between people who are selling the same thing about what that thing is, and how to describe it, and how to talk about the issues affecting their buyers. It's amazing, I think, that the lack of internal clarity sometimes, and clever content, engaged communities are at their best when there is a clear and honest conversation within businesses, that are driving that drives the clarity of that. Finally, if you're clear internally and you've got an understanding of the market externally, then you're going to make commercial gains that people will think, even if they don't want to buy something from you now, they will think, if ever I need whatever it is, then I'm going to go to those guys. So it's an issues-based content like that is what I think makes the difference. So
brilliant. Yeah, you make a strong case for it, and I do agree with you. But how do you then feel about a lot of businesses that are perhaps moving away from the longer pieces, and perhaps some sort of, they might not term it, but the thought leadership pieces and the opinion pieces, and perhaps moving on to LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and trying to do snappy, funny bits of content nearly. I mean, the world has sort of shifted, hasn't it? And so what's your opinion of that general social world, I suppose? And
the first thing I'd say about that is it's not necessarily a contradiction, because don't confuse the message with the medium, if you like. A lot of I mean, the thing I was saying just now about repurposing content is true, but the other way of looking at it is, if you do a piece of long thought leadership first, then you've thought around a lot of issues. You've also then got many pieces of short content that could derive out of that. So you've got strategy or something around your from a thought leadership paper, and that the short things that emerge from it can be used in social media. You could use it in a different form, a sort of form, more visual, sort of snappier, funny little GIFs or whatever. You want. They've got nothing against those at all. I mean, in fact, they really serve their purpose. But if you start off with the short things, then in a way, what you're doing is saying, let's just use a bunch of tactics to get a point across. But you haven't necessarily had a strategic conversation. That strategic conversation doesn't necessarily have to result in thought leadership, but you need to understand the bigger picture of where you are. If you are just simply doing, a whole series of short bite-sized things without any sort of deeper thought in that, then I think you risk missing something in terms of the clarity with which you are speaking in the longer term.
Yeah. Okay. And I get that. If you start with the larger piece, you get the consistency, don't you? Get your message, you're more strategic, and then the repurposing of content. I mean, it's a very clever thing that content marketers do all the time, but it's so powerful, isn't it? Because you can get that multi-use, and you're not always having to reinvent the wheel. I suppose One of those things that you talked about when we are just talking about the formula is a lot of perhaps business owners, business leaders don't actually understand that, to them it's not rocket science. So they kind of demean it.
Mm.
How do you go about getting that kind of valuable thought leadership content, that real meaningful knowledge from some of your clients that you can then build on and allow them to develop into a proper piece?
Okay, so it usually starts with me. So I'll have a conversation where let's take an example of, say, a business leader of a small to medium sized
Mm.
enterprise. So maybe they've got about 100 people, and they're sort of they're busy rushing around. They founded the business, and so they've got the whole concept and the vision and the purpose in their minds. And to greater or lesser extent, the people in their business
Yeah.
have got a part of the picture. They sort of understand. And the conversation would go something like this: that a marketing director from that business would get in touch with me and say, look, we like what you did with that other business. Can we have a conversation about this? And I would say, well, what are you trying to achieve? And classic consultancy question. What are you trying to achieve?
Big open question.
Yeah. And so they tell me a bit what's happening. What I do before I start working with them, I insist on having a conversation, where I find out a lot more about what's really driving them as a business, what they're trying to achieve, but a lot more sort of sub questions around that, if you like, just to get a sense of the character and things. So I suppose I pride myself in taking a bit of time to do that, and do that, and then playing back what they have said to me, but talking to them in that terms and how that relates to what people might be interested in,
Yeah.
because you have to take it on certain pretexts. One is I will never know their market as well as they know their market. But, I think as somebody who's writing thought leadership, I do know something about the psychology of buying or interest and maintaining sort of interest. And so I ask them a lot of questions around, the technical side of what their buyers are interested in, but also the psychology about what makes, give me examples of why they bought in that situation but not in that situation. From that, then I'm picking out interesting themes, and I'm saying, well, look, if we're going to talk about something, it seems to me that, and it may be something like, we know that there's a change in legislation coming up, in 3 months'
Yeah.
time, that's going to affect their industry. So one sort of obvious thing is you want to be writing something around that, because it's something that their buyers are thinking about right now.
Yeah.
Or it may be a fundamental change in the landscape in some other way. COVID is the obvious example. It's like, how you don't get much more fundamental than that, and so you actually are presenting it more as a guide to sort of help our buyers through a particular sort of set of situations. Whatever it is, you start with the business first, and then you think about how the content can best support that. It's not, I would never go into, so I kind of listen quite a lot to start with. I'm talking quite a lot at the moment, but I listen.
Well, you are the
But
guest, so
yeah,
that's good.
well, I suppose so, yeah. But I spend most of my time listening,
Yeah.
and listening very carefully, and then saying how I heard something, how I received something, and which in itself creates a value for them. But then obviously they want something around that, in terms of, if I'm producing a thought leadership paper, I will suggest ideas that I think that might resonate with their audience, as I understand at the moment. And then we refine it, and then I get on with writing it. Sometimes with bigger businesses than the one I just described, they've already got a sort of big marketing team, and they might want content support in other ways. They may just literally say, we know what we want, and this is what we want, and can you just write it for us? And the
Yeah.
role is much narrower in that case. That often
But the more
happens.
interesting one must be those small organizations that need the strategy and the help and the
Yeah,
consultancy as well, mustn't it?
there's a bunch in the middle, which, not to put too fine a point on it, have a budget to do it.
Yeah.
But also, they're not so big that you can't feel you're not having an influence, or don't have the access to the people who founded the business, or are driving the business in some way.
So, Trevor, where does collaboration fit with thought leadership?
Yeah, I love it when people get in a room together and collaborate. And if you think about what's happened in the pandemic, for example, people have had to, for example, lead in a very different way. You've had a whole bunch of people who suddenly out of nowhere have had to sort of be at home, and the leaders in those situations, leaders and managers, have had to adopt a different style of leadership in many cases, where they see someone struggling, with the kids in the kids are wandering around in the background, or something's going wrong, or they've it's just like a whole variety of things where you suddenly get a more of a personal insight into people's lives. Leaders have had to change. They've had to be more collaborative initially through an online medium, in order to continue to work together. And I think what's happened as a result of that is that this has a knock-on effect for things like thought leadership, not only thought leadership, where the teams have to have have some, if you're going to get people's thoughts and ideas out of them in a virtual online forum, you've actually got to be a bit more deliberate about it. And so, I mean, technology, of course, has really helped the quality of collaboration within companies, and it also has also the march of technology, I think, in some ways, particularly in very big businesses, have actually aided finding and locating expertise within a business. And if you're okay for me to give you a quick example on this,
Please.
I was once working with a major credit card provider, I'll call them that, in the UK, and they had there were some floods a couple of years back, and they were looking for solutions in terms of floods affecting things. They were an insurer. Somebody low down in the organization who was kind of receiving a lot of these calls from people who were really worried, their house had just been flooded, and they didn't know what to do, had an idea around we've got all the postcodes of all these people who are affected by the floods. Why don't we write a preemptive letter, or send them a preemptive email, and just not preemptive in the sense that they hadn't been affected, but an early one, at saying, look, we know you're struggling at the moment and you're an area, we're going to we're going to create extra credit time and extend credit lines to you, so you can actually make sure you're able to repair your houses in time, and favorable terms, and I don't know the exact details of that. Anyway, because of technology and because of the collaborative sort of mindset that was already in the business, he was able to percolate this up, within the business, and within a few hours, he'd put it on their online platform. The CEO had said, there's a great idea here. The finance director, wasn't quite sure, was asking how much it would cost. The HR director, sorry to stereotype it, the HR director was saying, that's fantastic. How do we mobilize the people in the business to do this? And then they said, come and present your ideas, and of course his first reaction was, oh my God, they wanted to present the ideas. And then his second thing was that, oh, well, who do I know in the business, who might be able to help? So this was a UK business, but it had an American parent company. He kind of, on the online platform, and a collaborative platform, he sourced a whole bunch of ideas, got in some expertise from America, where I think in Mississippi they'd had something very similar, in recent years. And he was able to cobble together a sort of best practice, if you like, from within the business, which he never would have been able to do before. So collaboration, if you like, can percolate up, and towards sort of thought leadership and also action, within a business. They cut a long story short, they put together a working group on this, got the letters out or the emails out, and actually, my understanding is that their customer credit scores amongst those postcodes sort of shot up. And so they did the right thing, and this guy's profile, rose within the business. So it was good for him, good for everybody else. And so once people see that, of course, in a business, they start to think, well, I've got a great idea too. And
definitely
and
creates that environment, doesn't it? And that culture, definitely.
I think collaboration is really important in this, and it's actually the friend of thought leadership. It's not, there's a certain fear around, if you have too many people in the room, are you going to come up with 100 different views? And actually, I think if you're skilled in the way you filter those views down, if you like, and similar views, then actually you do get a much better outcome.
Perfect. So it's been good to talk to you about content and thought leadership, but you're also very passionate and write quite often about having strong values and integrity. Where do you think values come from, and what would you say it means to have integrity in both business and in life? Quite a deep and meaningful question for you there, Trevor.
Crikey, yes. I mean, I do. I'm not. When I say I have strong values, integrity, you read this sometimes and you think, well, how do I know if he's got strong values? And I kind of,
Everybody says that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I'm sort of often think about I don't know if you've heard the sort of, I think it's a Groucho Marx line, it's sort of like I've got principles, and if you don't like my principles, I've got some other principles, and
Yeah.
and too much of that I think is kind of pseudo, principles, if you like, and but what I mean by it is that you really have there's a quote by Benjamin Franklin, which is, I think it says, glass, china, and reputation are easily cracked and never easily mended. Sorry if I've misquoted you, I misquoted on that one. And to me, the values are important because if these days, if your values aren't solid and genuinely how you feel about something, eventually you will get found out, I think, as a
Mm.
business or as an individual, because you will present this front to the world, and people are far more critical now, and they can actually see sort of deeper inside your business through things like Glassdoor as to whether your values are truly your values. They've got to be not just stated values as they are, in so many cases, but actually lived
Yeah.
values. And I think that's how you separate out the sort of the kind of the good businesses from the bad businesses in a value sense. That's what I mean by values. Does that make sense,
Yeah,
though?
no, it does. And
Yeah.
I'm with you. I think, there's too many big businesses and small businesses that, come up with a set of words that they say are their values,
They're often the
and
same. And if you compare them across, they're often the
their
same
honesty,
ones.
integrity,
Yeah, no.
passion, and you can see them. But actually, what I love to see is businesses that have really stopped and thought and engaged with their organization, their team, and maybe even their
Yeah,
customers and suppliers, and said what
yeah,
truly represents us. And then you get some kind of quirky words sometimes, and
yeah,
and usually you find those businesses are the businesses that really do live and breathe
yeah,
and
yeah,
reward, and there's consequences for not behaving in
yeah.
that way. And to me, that's what value should represent: is there should be rewards and consequences that go with them.
I think that's absolutely right. And I mean, you're seeing uh, chickens coming home to roost. I think in some of those businesses that maybe had a stated set of values pre-pandemic,
Mm,
and people, they all pull together, pulling together in adversity. Now we're in the UK, at least, starting to move a bit beyond that, and you're seeing sort of a massive turnover in some businesses, and some businesses are losing a lot of people, and some businesses aren't really losing any people at all.
mm,
And although I haven't done the thought leadership paper on this, I would bet anything that a lot of it has to do with, did they live up to their values when the chips
yeah,
were down, and
yeah,
and I, and I'm just waiting to either read or maybe even write the
mm,
paper that actually looks into that.
yeah,
I've got one other thing, if I can say something on this, is that I, and I'm not, this is not a political point at all, but I think there has been this, a lot of the thing about values for me has to do with, an integrity has to do with what I sort of see as an erosion of the truth, I think,
mm,
and that certain situations in politics, shall we say, where actually people are just plainly and openly sort of saying things that aren't true, and I think that just, it doesn't matter so much in terms of the individual. It matters, of course, that they're not telling the truth, but what it's doing is it's nibbling away at the moral base, if you like,
mm,
of, and it affects my world of content, because people don't know what to believe or what to trust, these days, and I feel very strongly about that. So I suppose that's a value as well.
yeah. Well, that's true. Actually, I hadn't really thought about that. Have you? When people mistrust, governments or large corporates or communications or the media in general, because I think there's
Mm,
a lot of mistrust of the media right now, isn't there?
yeah,
Then the organizations that are putting out content and thought leadership pieces, as well as you say yourself, really need to stop and think about how is this going to be received, and is there going to be a skepticism in it, and
yeah,
how do we overcome that so it is seen with the meaning and its in true intentions.
yeah. Totally. I mean, there's I forget who it was now, but there's some 19th century guy who said, I know, Albert Hubbard, that's who it was.
Okay.
Many a man's reputation would not know his character if he met it on the street. And that's always stay with me, that quote, because
Mm.
because that goes to the heart of values, if you like, is that your values are only your values if they're lived, if they're genuinely felt and acted upon.
That is a great quote, definitely.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
suppose all of this comes down to authenticity, doesn't it? And
yeah.
I suppose that is what we've just been talking about. Is what is authenticity, and
Mm,
having content and behaving in a way that's authentic. Anything
yeah.
else you'd add around that?
Around authenticity,
Yeah.
I mean, if we take it back to the sort of like the business content sense, I do try and spend some time with my clients also, making sure that when they say something like, as many businesses do, you say to them things like, who are your competitors, and they will say something like, we don't really have any real competitors because our product is so unique. And that's a sort of often thing, and I'm saying, do you really mean that? And I'll sort of probe them away, because that's often the stuff they say. They say our product is so unique. Actually, many people's products are kind of a bit unique, and but there are sort of large overlaps, and that I feel that you could very few people can say our product or our service is completely unique, but they can say we do it in a better way, and
Mm.
we do that, but they have to live up to that, and that's business authenticity. If they've got something that they say they do differently, and that could be the price, or it could be the mode of delivery, or whatever, but it's got to be something that they actually genuinely live up to. That's the only other thing I'd add on that.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah,
I think it's about living up to everything, isn't it? I think that sums up from a personal and a business perspective is
yeah,
do what you say you're going to do, and deliver on what you say you are. And that successful organizations do very well, doesn't it? And other organizations don't do that and may succeed in the moment and look like they're succeeding in a
mm.
spectacular way, but also quite often fail in such a spectacular fashion as well.
Yeah, I mean the text from, I mean, it's a little bit older now, but the good to great text,
Yeah,
from business text. I mean there's some real truth in that about the longevity of certain businesses and what is it that they have that's a bit different, and
yeah.
values really come in very strongly to that. And the times may change and the situation, circumstances, but it's about that kind of DNA, if you like.
Definitely, definitely. And you've actually written 3 high-profile business books yourself. So,
Quite a while ago now, but yes, I'm going to go back and write a few more now, because the kids are heading off to university now, one by one, and I
okay.
never had time for the last sort of 20 years, but I'm getting back to it now, so I'm starting to write a lot more of my own stuff as well as other people's stuff. So yeah, and so there'll be it's coming your way, yeah.
Okay. So, what I was going to ask you is, obviously you've written books on business, but is there any particular books on business and leadership that you've been moved and inspired by? Good to Great is one you've just mentioned, but any
Yeah.
others?
Well, I've the thing is, of course, I have actually got them with me. This is no good for in terms of a podcast thing, so because people can't see it, but I'm going to show them to you at least, Warren,
Yeah.
and everyone else have to. The first one is this one,
Okay.
How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie. Very old book now,
Yeah.
but it came at a certain time in my life where I was worrying about everything,
Okay.
and I really and the worry becomes, it not only sort of mentally affects you, but it physically affects you. And some of the stuff I read in the early book about how it affects people in terms of stress and the effect that actually has on the trauma on your body and stuff like that,
Mm.
just scared the life out of me. And it made me, just reading the first chapter made me realize that I had to do something about it. And so that's a wonderful book, which I'd recommend to anybody. It reads in a very sort of American folksy way, and
Yeah.
but I love it, and I love it probably more than the How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is the more famous book that
Yeah.
he's written. But to me, that changed my life, because it kind of it took off the limits of my own sort of thinking. I mean,
Yeah.
we all worry about things, of course we do,
Definitely.
but it kind of gave me a little bit of a framework for dealing with it. Second book,
Yeah.
okay, is by it's called Create Space,
Okay,
by
haven't heard of that.
Derek Draper. Better known, sadly, actually, as the husband of, Kate Garraway, the TV presenter.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so he's the guy who caught COVID,
Yeah.
and he's a friend of mine. He wrote this book, and just one, before all of that happened, and it's just a beautifully written book, and I was delighted to be. I didn't I didn't write this. He wrote this, but he showed me an early copy of it, and
Okay.
I was really, now thinking about it, I feel very privileged to have,
Mm.
sort of known him and stuff like that. But the whole premise of this book summed up with one line that he wrote. He said, "We have become the first generation in 1,000 generations of human beings who, rather than having the need to fill space, have the need to create it." And so it's all about creating space in your life. The concept of space, not just by better diary management, but also it's in the mind as well, about how
Wow.
you sort of do that and focus on things. You'll see a productivity bent on here, because the final book is Hyper Focus by Chris Bailey. I've only just started. I'm still reading this one.
Okay.
And
But it's already having a profound effect, is it?
well, I, I don't know yet. I mean, but this is very promising, because it's just basically talking about work. There's different types of work. There's purposeful work, and we all like to think we'd like to be doing purposeful work all the time. But there's also the necessary work that we find a bit of a chore, but
Yeah.
we know we've got to get done. And then all the other things around distractions. And earlier on in this conversation, we talked a little bit about social media. I can be a little bit of a victim of that sometimes, and
Can't we
so
all?
yeah, and so I have to sort of, and it's talking about smart tactics and tips for dragging yourself back, without feeling like it's an effort, to go back to the sort of necessary but maybe slightly dull stuff.
Yeah.
So those are three.
That's
Is that enough?
3 good recommendations. Yeah, definitely. I've only read one of them as well, so I'm going to go and read the last book 2 and 3,
Yeah,
and go and look up and read myself.
yeah, yeah.
And I suppose that leads on just to, as we start to wrap up, some final questions. Right now, what hard thing are you not doing enough of? What thing would you challenge yourself to do
Ooh,
more of?
okay. When you do what I do, you have a business, and it's a consultancy now, and I have people coming in, dipping out, and helping and supporting around the business, and it's got me to a certain level. I think what I'm not doing enough of is, on a personal basis, is that sometimes I feel like I need to think bigger. I need
Yeah.
to, it's about scaling time, scaling the team. And I'm starting to do that now, but it's a bit patchy, and I sort of take 2 steps forward, and I take 1 step back, and I take 2 steps forward, and I take 1 step back. And in terms of scaling, the team and the resources that go around that team, I think I need to be a bit braver than I have
Yeah.
been to this point, because I could carry on making a very comfortable, and enjoyable, purposeful living in what I do. But I think I could do more. I think I could scale it up more, and I could do it without losing any of the quality. But I just have to. I think in terms of doing a bit more of, I think I just need to be a bit braver sometimes in doing that. So that's my
Yeah.
big thing for 2022. In fact.
Wow, that is a big thing. Good
Yeah.
luck with that.
Thank you.
Definitely. And 2 of those books will certainly help you with that.
Yeah.
If not all 3. And in terms of, you've led that corporate life, you've started your own business.
Yeah.
What effect has running your own business had on your own personal family life? You talk now about the kids being off or going to university one by one, but
Yeah.
what have been some of the benefits and disadvantages that you've seen?
I when I started, because I had a long debate with my wife about whether this was a good idea, and and I said something along the lines of, and this is no disrespect to anybody I've worked with in the past, but at that moment I said, I'm fed up with working for idiots. And
Yeah.
she said, "That's it. You want to be the idiot." And and I sort of went, "No, that's not quite what I meant." But I could see it. So and in a way, at the start, I was worrying whether I would be the idiot. Whether
Mm,
I'd be the person who would be like running around, sort of working for decreasingly small amounts of money, sort of desperately, begging people for work
yeah.
and so on. And I thought, she said, do it for 6 months, see whether you like it. And so I did it. 6 months, and I not only had the roof not fallen in, and we weren't sort of getting behind with the bailiffs or anything like that.
Yeah.
Things were going okay, and I was getting some work in, and so that dynamic, was, if you rate it back to that book around worry, the Dale Carnegie book, that was the time when I first started to overcome it, I think, and so you stop worrying, you start living, and you start to think about, how can we improve on this? And it becomes, and the downside, I mean, you'll know this, Warren, as well, that you have a huge amount of freedom, but you have freedom sometimes to be working 18 hours a day, or to be, or to screw it up, basically. And, because you can't turn around and say it's his fault or it's her fault.
No.
It's your fault.
You're
And
controlling your own destiny in your own time, aren't you?
yeah, absolutely. And even as you sort of start to grow, it still is being driven by you, and and you're developing it until you reach the point where the organization just, haven't got to that point yet, where things will just carry on, because everybody's got the genesis of what the business is trying to do, what the purpose is. So, I mean, I now do mentoring for people who are starting up their own business.
Yes.
I work through a business called 1080, who, when people are being outplaced, as the current term has it, sort of, I sometimes get involved when those people say, actually, I wouldn't mind starting up a business, because, I've been in that position where I've been starting something up, and those initial thoughts and steps that people take, I think, are really important, and probably not quite what they think, in terms of what you should be worried about and what you shouldn't be worried about, so I try and help people that way.
Brilliant. That must be really meaningful and really rewarding to do that.
It's a lot of fun. And if I had a client, who came back to me just on Friday, who'd started up a business, and she then sent me a message about how she'd been advertising at this trade show, and she's got the business going, and people are taking interest in it now, and so on. And the feeling that gave me was just incredible, so
Brilliant.
I mean, I'm 10 years, nearly 10 years, sort of long in the tooth now on entrepreneurs. Many of us don't survive more than 2 years, so I feel quite proud to have got this far, and also very happy and proud to be helping people make their first little baby steps as well. So
fantastic. So, Trevor, if people want to find out more information about you and about Merriborn Media, where can they go?
Well, there's a few sort of little avenues that they can take. There's Merriborn Media, so that's MERRIBORN Media, all one word, .co.uk. Or I'm on Trevor Merriden, that's MERRIDEN, on Twitter, or you'll find me on LinkedIn if you just type in. I've done a new paper on thought leadership, and I think if you typed the new thought leadership revolution into Google, you'd find it by various means, I think. So
brilliant. Trevor, it's been great to have you on the Evolve to Succeed podcast. I've really enjoyed our conversation around thought leadership and content and that meaningful side of things, but also on our conversation around values and authenticity. So thank you for being a great guest on the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
And thank you for the opportunity. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Evolve to Succeed podcast. My hope with every episode is that you've learned something new or heard something that challenged your way of thinking and further motivated you on your path towards becoming a more knowledgeable, informed, and inspired individual and business leader. If you enjoyed this episode, then please help us by rating, reviewing, and subscribing. We really value your feedback and would love to have you along for future episodes. And please don't forget to learn more about Evolve by going to evolvedmembers.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.